Pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, it's time for our political panel, and joining us today is the Assistant Minister for Trade, Tim Ayres, and we also have the Shadow Minister for Early Childhood Education, Angie Bell. Welcome both of you to Capitol Hill.
Thanks, Henry.
Tim, I'll start with you.
Sure.
We've had, on everybody's favourite topic as well, industrial relations. We've had this Senate report that's recommended some changes to the bill. One of them is excluding small businesses that have less than 20 staff rather than 15. Is that a fair proposal?
Well, it's certainly, the government's indicated we're going to work through all of these issues with the crossbench. I'm not going to negotiate on the minister's behalf on your program today.
It's unfortunate.
But I know that would be terrific viewing for your listeners, but a pretty short-term plan for me, I think. But we've certainly said, we're keen to work with the crossbench to consider sensible amendments that don't undercut the sort of core purpose of the legislation. And this is really important legislation for Australia. Fixing the better off overall test, some of the other challenges that sit there in the bargaining system, dealing squarely with pay equity and gender equity in the workplace, and fixing our sclerotic and broken bargaining system. We have to get more people in the collective bargaining system if we're going to lift wages and lift productivity.
Well, it's the crossbenchers that this is ultimately going to come down to. David Pocock, potentially Jackie Lambie as well. Clearly, they're not happy at the moment. We've got 2 extra days of sitting in the Senate. Are you indicating that the government's willing to meet them halfway on a few of these things, that it's not take it or leave it?
Well, the government's going to keep working with the crossbench. There's a lot of goodwill to work through the issues there. But the international evidence here is overwhelming. 18 out of 26 of our OECD counterparts have multi-employer bargaining sitting in their system. It's a core part of not just their workplace relations strategy, but their macroeconomic strategy, because it delivers less unemployment, higher employment, higher wages, higher productivity and more cooperative workplaces. Now, if we're going to deal with the big challenges of some of these sectors, like the sector that Angie works in childcare, the idea that the skills challenges and all those sorts of problems are going to be dealt with in childcare, low pay, all these challenges are going to be dealt with the existing enterprise bargaining system is fanciful.
Well, what do you think on this, Angie Bell? I know the coalition has been very critical of this, but let's just go to that proposal that's been put forward by the Senate committee, increasing the amount of people in the businesses for it to be excluded, 20. Is that a fair figure for you? Is that the right balance?
Thanks for the question, Henry. I think, Tim, what I would say to what you just said is that the government should have spoken with small business before putting this bill together. And it's clear that the Albanese government has not done that. Yesterday, in question time, we asked the Small Business Minister, who's supposed to be the champion for small business, we asked her to name one business that she had spoken with, and she failed to do so. This government has not spoken with small business. Small business do not understand the ramifications of this bill, this freight train that's coming towards them. It's going to cost them. The costs have now come out. It's going to cost them more than $14,000 just to sit at the bargaining table for a small business, and $75,000 for a medium-sized business, just to be part of the bargaining that is going to that is heading towards a small business right now. So this is going to really impact hundreds of thousands of small and family businesses across this country.
But Henry,
we've had 40 years of stability here.
I'll just pick you up on one thing. I know some of those figures might be disputed by Senator Ayres as well, but why is it then that the Council of Small Business gave some initially approving noises when this legislation was first proposed after the Jobs and Skills Summit?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that. I spoke with the chairman last night at a dinner about that, and what COSBOA did was agree to talk about it. There was an agreement to discuss it. COSBOA has since withdrawn their support, as has very many other organisations, peak bodies across the country, including the ACCI, the Chamber of Commerce, including many other, the Minerals Council is another one, that do not support these changes to industrial relations, which will take us back to the 70s and 80s.
I'll take you back to that figure. What is a small business? Is it a business that has less than 20? Is that fine for you?
Well, in the legislation, it's 15. So a head count, and for a start, small businesses don't talk about a head count. This is not sheep and cattle we're talking about. This is families across the nation. We talk about FTEs, full-time employees, and that is the count. That's what the Labor Party should be looking at in terms of how they define the count, and they need to actually define what that is. And we don't think 20 is enough. We think it should be 100 or even 200 to exclude small and medium business.
We've got a couple of issues to cover as well, but I'll just put that to you as well.
Look,
and one of the things as well that Angie Bell mentioned there, why wasn't this put to the Australian people during the election campaign before they voted?
Well, we squarely put the issue of wages and the bargaining system on the agenda, and this is the right thing to do for the system. There won't
not multi-employer bargaining.
There won't be universal agreement, that's for sure. It's industrial relations. There will be a highly motivated ideological scare campaign coming from the Liberals and Nationals on this question. It
Is that a reason why you want to get it through?
Sensible people shouldn't be engaged in it. You know, it's completely ignorant of the facts.
What does that mean? Sensible people shouldn't be engaged?
Completely ignorant of the problems in our enterprise bargaining system and our collective bargaining system. It's designed to create a scare campaign to frighten Australian businesses, but the evidence again is very clear.
But what about the small businesses
what part of this
that do have
we
real
want?
concern?
Well,
are we saying they're not being sensible?
Yeah, well, small businesses, there is already a specific exclusion from some provisions of the Act for small business. So that's sitting there in the legislation. The Senate will work through those questions over the coming weeks. But the principle's really important here. The international evidence is overwhelming. Higher wages, higher productivity, lower unemployment, higher employment, more workplace cooperation. I mean, which bit of that don't we want in the system? Now, the Australian system, what it's delivered for the last 10 years, Angie says stability, what it's delivered is declining real wages. It's forced people off the collective bargaining system, either onto the minimum rate or in a situation where they can't bargain for higher wages. That's the problem. We can't leave the system as it is because it's holding Australians back.
I think everybody can agree that wages have been stagnant for a very long time. The disagreement is kind of how to get them moving. Yeah. Let's talk about another big issue in Parliament, the National Anti-Corruption Commission. The government introduced some amendments on this as well, Angie Bell. Is that making you more inclined to support this legislation?
Well, what I would say is that we do, of course, support a corruption commission, but we want to make sure that there are no double standards for unions versus the rest of those who will be open to this corruption commission in terms of the AFP, in terms of NDIS workers and aged care workers who will all be scooped up in this. Yet John Setka and the unions have been carved out in section 12 and 14 of the bill. You can go and have a look at it, and it clearly defines and carves out the unions from being scooped up in this. So we want to make sure there's no double standards. We also want to make sure that there are no political appointees in terms of the commissioner.
Which is something the Greens want as well. So you're on a ticket with them.
We want to make sure that there aren't any political scalps taken through this process. We want to make sure that integrity and honesty, of course, is delivered through the government, through the parliament, through our nation, but we certainly want to make sure that there are no opportunities for political scalps in terms of who they appoint.
And Senator Ayres, very briefly, because we've got to get both of you to question time as well, public hearings, we're still hearing from former judges, transparency experts who want them. Very briefly, why can't that be the case?
Well, I'm pretty convinced by Mark Dreyfus's argument here, I have to say. The state systems, by and large, have the same framework for determining when a public hearing is in the public interest or it's necessary for an investigation. There are really solid reasons why all interviews, don't have to be public because there is a risk to investigation. So the framework that's been adopted here grapples with that reality, and I think leaves those decisions in the hand of an independent commissioner. And it's going to be the commissioner's responsibility to determine whether or not investigations go backwards in time, who is the subject of investigations. We're not going to politicise that process by framing up the Act so that it includes and excludes different categories. What we need is a return to confidence and faith in our democratic institutions, what politicians do, what public servants do, after a pretty shoddy 5 years.
Senator Ayres, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, but thank you very much for your time. And Angie Bell, thank you very much for your time. We'll let you both get to question time.
Thanks, Angie.